The rain lashed the streets of Seattle on that winter night, creating a gray veil that seemed to swallow the city. The Steakhouse Supreme, one of the most prestigious establishments in the neighborhood, gleamed like a beacon amidst the storm. Its foggy glass windows let escape the cozy warmth from inside, where patrons enjoyed their dinners amid the pleasant buzz of cutlery and conversations. Henry adjusted the temperature of the grill with the precision of someone who knew every nuance of fire. At 35, his calloused hands carried not only the experience of a renowned chef, but also the marks of a life that taught him the value of every piece of bread. His brown eyes, always alert, scanned the kitchen with the calm authority of one who had transformed that space into his own kingdom. On the other side of the dining room, Greg, the owner, coordinated the service with his usual meticulousness. Tall, always impeccable in his tailored suit, he had built Steakhouse Supreme from scratch, turning it into a gastronomic reference. For him, every detail mattered, from the temperature of the wine to the arrangement of the tables, from the background music to the perfectly calibrated lighting. Among the customers, Mrs. Lucy savored her dinner with the calmness of someone who had learned to appreciate life's small pleasures. Widowed for 5 years, she frequented the restaurant religiously every Thursday, always occupying the same table near the window. Her gray hair framed a face that carried the wisdom of years lived, and her green eyes still maintained the sparkle of youth. She was the first to notice the trembling figure approaching the restaurant. A dog with soaked fur and a lost gaze stopped in front of the entrance, attracted by the aroma escaping through the cracks of the door. Its skinny body shivered, not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion of days wandering aimlessly. Mrs. Lucy's heart tightened. In her mind, flashbacks of her own story of overcoming began to emerge. She too had known hard times when she lost everything after her husband's passing. She knew what it was like to start from scratch, count coins to buy bread, feel the weight of loneliness. In the kitchen, Henry also noticed the animal's presence. Something in that scene instantly transported him to his childhood in the outskirts, when he and his siblings shared the day's leftovers. The smell of rain mixed with the aroma of food brought back memories he preferred to keep dormant. "This is unacceptable," Greg's cutting voice broke the moment of contemplation. "We can't have a stray animal scaring away our clientele." His eyes sparkled with irritation as he observed the dog through the glass. For him, that presence represented a threat to everything he had built with so much effort. The employees exchanged glances, hesitant. They knew their boss's temperament well enough to know that this situation wouldn't end well. Amanda, the young waitress who had been working there for only 2 months, bit her lips, torn between compassion and fear of losing her job. The dog, oblivious to the tension its presence caused, remained still, its eyes reflecting the restaurant's lights like small mirrors of water. The rain ran down its mistreated fur, forming a puddle at its feet. Its snout occasionally rose, sniffing the air laden with tempting aromas. Greg adjusted his tie with a brusque movement and began walking towards the door. His decisive steps echoed through the dining room, gradually silencing the customers' conversations. The atmosphere, once welcoming, began to charge with a palpable tension. Mrs. Lucy squeezed the napkin between her fingers, her expression a mixture of apprehension and indignation. Around her, other customers began to notice the scene unfolding, some already discreetly pulling out their cell phones. In the kitchen, Henry felt a tightness in his chest. His hands, always steady in handling pots and knives, trembled slightly. Something inside him screamed that he couldn't allow this story to end like so many others he had witnessed throughout his life. The decision he would make in the next few seconds would change not only the fate of that animal, but also the course of his own existence. The clock on the wall marked exactly 8:47 p.m. when Greg pushed open the restaurant door, letting the cold wind invade the heated environment. The contrast between the warmth of the dining room and the coldness of the night created a curtain of steam, as if nature itself wanted to add a dramatic touch to that moment. The storm intensified as Greg approached the dog. His Italian shoes stepped in puddles with disdain, while his imposing figure cast a menacing shadow over the frightened animal. The icy wind ruffled his silk tie, but his face remained impassive, like a mask of inflexible authority. "Get out of here!" His voice sounded harsh, rising above the noise of the rain. The dog retreated a few steps, but hunger kept it tethered to that place like an invisible magnet. Its eyes, deep and pleading, met Greg's for a brief moment, as if trying to communicate all its desperation. Inside the restaurant, the silence was absolute. The customers watched the scene like spectators of a dramatic theater, their expressions varying between shock and indignation. Amanda, the waitress, let out a small sob, quickly stifled by the trembling hand she brought to her lips. Mrs. Lucy rose from her chair, her fingers gripping the edge of the table tightly. Her legs, normally hesitant due to age, seemed ready to cross the dining room. However, before she could take a step, a movement in the kitchen caught her attention. Henry had removed his apron with a quick and decisive movement. His eyes, normally serene, burned with a determination that few there had witnessed. In his mind, fragments of memory mixed with the present, the hunger cries of his younger siblings, his mother's helpless gaze, the nights when they shared a hard loaf of bread among 5 people. "I can't allow this," he muttered to himself as he walked towards the door. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of years of silence in the face of injustices he had witnessed. Each step he took towards the exit seemed to carry not only his body, but all the stories of pain and overcoming that constituted his essence. Outside, Greg had lost patience with the animal's silent resistance. His foot moved in a cruel impulse, pushing the dog that slipped on the wet sidewalk. The dull thud of the animal's body against the ground was like thunder in the silence that had settled. It was at that moment that Henry emerged into the rainy night. Without hesitation, he removed his jacket and wrapped the trembling animal, completely ignoring his boss's presence. His hands, calloused from years of work in the kitchen, were now instruments of gentleness, carefully examining the dog's skinny body for injuries. "What do you think you're doing?" Greg's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Do you have any idea of the damage a stray animal can cause to my restaurant's reputation?" Henry slowly raised his eyes, meeting his employer's furious gaze. For the first time in 5 years of work, his voice came out firm and defiant. "And do you have any idea of the damage that lack of compassion can cause to a person's soul?" The confrontation between the two men electrified the environment. Through the restaurant windows, dozens of cell phones captured every moment of that surreal scene. Social media began to buzz with the first images of the incident, shared in real time by indignant customers. Mrs. Lucy, who was now standing near the E4 door, was the first to break the silence inside the establishment. Her voice, though soft, carried an authority that made several customers nod in agreement. "Sometimes, Greg, we spend so much time building walls that we forget to build bridges." Henry, still holding the dog in his arms, turned his back on the key restaurant and began walking in the rain. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he was absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. The animal, feeling safe for the first time in a long time, relaxed in his arms, as if understanding that this was a decisive moment in its life. A few meters away, a young woman passing by car recorded the moment when the chef crossed the street, with the dog in his arms, the rain falling mercilessly on both. The image, posted minutes later on her social media with the hashtag #ChefHero, would be the spark of a revolution that no one could predict. The following morning dawned with a shy sun in Seattle, but social media was already buzzing with the story of the chef and the abandoned dog. The video of the confrontation at Steakhouse Supreme had spread like wildfire, reaching millions of views in a matter of hours. The hashtag with #ChefHero dominated the trending topics, accompanied by hundreds of thousands of comments outraged by Greg's attitude. Henry, oblivious to the viral repercussion, had been at the veterinary clinic since the early hours of the morning. The dog, which he had begun to call Brave, was undergoing a series of tests. Dr. Maria, the veterinarian responsible for the care, was carefully examining the results when something unexpected caught her attention. "Henry, we found a microchip," she revealed, adjusting her glasses while observing the computer screen. "This dog had a family. I can try to trace the information, but it will take some time." The news hit Henry like a punch in the stomach. Sitting next to the gurney where Brave rested, he gently stroked the animal's head. "How can someone simply abandon a being that trusted you?" he murmured, more to himself than to the veterinarian. Meanwhile, at Steakhouse Supreme, Greg faced a chaotic morning. The phone wouldn't stop ringing with reservation cancellations, and his social media was flooded with messages of repudiation. Amanda, the young waitress, discreetly observed, her boss pacing back and forth, gesticulating nervously while talking on the phone with his press officer. "I don't care what it costs. I want this story out of the news by the end of the day," he vociferated, his normally controlled face now red with frustration. However, his attempts to control the damage seemed to only worsen the situation. Each clarification note he published was met with even more criticism and negative shares. Mrs. Lucy, at her home, followed everything on television. Her heart warmed to see how Henry's attitude had awakened a movement of solidarity throughout the city. Several restaurants began to create pet corners on their sidewalks, with water bowls and food for stray animals. Some people were even organizing a peaceful demonstration in front of Steakhouse Supreme for the weekend. In the modest apartment where he lived, Henry received dozens of messages of support. Journalists tried to schedule interviews. Animal protection, NGOs wanted his participation in events, and ordinary people shared their own stories of compassion with abandoned animals. But his attention was entirely focused on Brave, who now slept peacefully in an improvised bed in the living room. The cell phone rang once more. It was Carl, his younger brother, who worked as an app delivery driver on the other side of the city. "Bro, you've become a celebrity," he exclaimed with a proud laugh. "Mom can't stop crying seeing your photos on TV. She said she always knew you had a heart bigger than the world." His brother's words brought tears to Henry's eyes. He remembered his mother, Mrs. Teresa, who raised 4 children alone working as a housekeeper. It was she who taught him that true wealth was in helping others, even when you had almost nothing to give. In the afternoon, a surprise. Mrs. Lucy appeared at his door, carrying a basket with homemade breads and an envelope. "I came to bring a treat for Brave, and something more," she said, handing the envelope to Henry. Inside were documents from an NGO she presided over, dedicated to helping abandoned animals. "We need people like you, Henry," she explained, her eyes shining with emotion. "Someone who not only talks about compassion, but practices it even when no one is looking. How about we join forces to transform this story into something even bigger?" Mrs. Lucy's proposal lit a light in Henry's heart. As he stroked Brave, who was now curiously approaching the visitor, he began to visualize possibilities he had never considered before. Perhaps his true purpose was greater than creating refined dishes in a luxury restaurant. Perhaps it was time to use his talent to feed not only bodies, but also souls. Mrs. Lucy's proposal took shape more quickly than anyone could have imagined. In just 1 week, Henry and Brave's story had inspired a true revolution in the city. Restaurants that previously ignored the presence of stray animals now competed to see who could create the most welcoming space for them. In Henry's apartment, Brave recovered day by day. His fur, once dull and mistreated, began to gain shine, and his eyes no longer carried that constant look of fear. Dr. Maria, who continued to monitor his recovery, couldn't hide her satisfaction with the animal's progress. "I got some more information about the microchip," she informed during a follow-up visit. "It was registered 3 years ago in the name of a family that lived in the Green Lake neighborhood, but the address and phone numbers no longer exist." Henry absorbed the information in silence, watching Brave play with a stuffed toy that Amanda, the waitress from Steakhouse Supreme, had brought as a gift. Something in his heart told him that maybe it was better not to find the former owners. Some bridges, once broken, didn't need to be rebuilt. Meanwhile, Steakhouse Supreme faced its worst crisis in years. The empty tables were a stark contrast to the lines forming at other restaurants in the area, especially those that had joined the movement to support stray animals. Greg, for the first time in his business life, found himself forced to rethink his values. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after another lunch with the dining room practically empty, he found Amanda crying discreetly in the service area. The young waitress, who depended on tips to help with college, was desperate at the possibility of losing her job. "You know, Mr. Gregg," she said, wiping away tears, "my grandmother always said that there's no mistake that can't be fixed. We Just need to have the humility to recognize when we're wrong and the courage to change. The waitress's simple words echoed in Greg's mind all night. In his luxurious penthouse, he spent hours looking out the window, recalling his own path to get there. He hadn't been born with a silver spoon. His fortune was the result of years of hard work. At some point, however, he had forgotten his own origins. The next morning, an unexpected call surprised Henry. It was Greg asking to talk. The meeting was set in a neutral cafe, away from the curious glances that still surrounded Steakhouse Supreme. When Henry arrived, he found a different man from the arrogant businessman he knew. "I spent the whole night thinking," Greg began, nervously stirring his coffee. "You were right. I lost something important along the way, something that no financial success can buy." The conversation that followed was long and sincere. Greg talked about his humble childhood, about how the fear of returning to poverty had transformed him into someone who measured everything only by monetary value. Henry, in turn, shared his dreams of using gastronomy as a tool for social transformation. At the end of the meeting, an unexpected proposal emerged. Greg wanted to transform Steakhouse Supreme into something completely new. Not just a restaurant that accepted animals, but a space that actively promoted awareness about animal abandonment and social responsibility. "I envision a place where people and animals can coexist in harmony," he explained, with a different sparkle in his eyes. "A restaurant that serves not only quality food but also hope. And I want you, Henry, to lead this transformation as a partner, no longer as an employee." The proposal caught Henry by surprise. In his mind, images of all the possibilities emerged. Cooking workshops for people in vulnerable situations, partnerships with animal protection NGOs, charity events that united gastronomy and social causes. It was as if the universe conspired to transform a moment of confrontation into an opportunity for real change. The news of the partnership between Henry and Greg took the city by surprise. Social media, which a few weeks ago fiercely criticized Steakhouse Supreme, now buzzed with speculation about the establishment's transformation. The local press talked about nothing else, and public curiosity grew every day. During the restaurant renovations, Dr. Maria made a surprising discovery about Brave's past. After weeks of investigation, she finally managed to trace the origin of the microchip to a veterinary clinic in eastern Washington. What she discovered would change everything. "Henry, you need to see this," she said, showing a folder with old documents. "His real name is Barron. He belonged to a family that went through a traumatic situation. The owner, a lady named Teresa Oliveira, had to move in a hurry to take care of her sick mother in another state. She tried to find a temporary home for the dog, but..." Henry's heart stopped for a moment. Teresa Oliveira, the same name as his mother. His hands trembled as he took the documents, and his eyes quickly scanned the information. The coincidence was too impossible to ignore. "My God," he whispered, dropping into the chair. "It's Aunt Bernadette's dog. She was my mother's neighbor when I was a child. I remember him. I remember playing with him in the yard." Memories began to come back like a movie. Aunt Bernadette, as everyone affectionately called her in the neighborhood, was a sweet lady who lived alone with her dog. She always offered cookies to the neighborhood children and let them play with Barron in her yard. When her mother fell ill in Portland, she had to leave quickly. Mrs. Lucy, who was present at the moment of revelation, had to sit down to absorb the news. "The universe has mysterious ways of closing circles," she commented, emotional. "Of all the abandoned dogs in Seattle, this one found its way to you." The news also deeply affected Greg, who was overseeing the restaurant renovation. For the first time, he began to see that there was something bigger at play than just a marketing strategy to recover the establishment's reputation. It was as if fate had architected every detail of that story. Amanda, the waitress, was the first to suggest that they turn the story into something even bigger. "What if we used social media not just to publicize the restaurant's transformation, but to help other animals reunite with their families?" she proposed, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. The idea quickly gained strength. Henry and Greg began to plan a special space in the new establishment, a digital mural that would present stories of lost or abandoned animals, connecting them to potential guardians. The project grew to include partnerships with veterinary clinics and animal protection NGOs. Meanwhile, Brave, who now responded to both his new name and the old one, had become a true local celebrity. His story of overcoming and the unlikely reunion with a connection from his past inspired people from all over the country. Television programs wanted to interview him along with Henry, and his image had become a symbol of hope and transformation. 1. Afternoon, while supervising the installation of the restaurant's new sign, Henry received a message that made him smile. It was an old photo sent by his mother, showing him as a child playing with a dog in Aunt Bernadette's yard. In the caption she had written, "Son, some stories are written in the stars. You didn't find Baron by chance. He found you to remind you of who you've always been." The chef looked at Brave, who was sleeping peacefully in his new bed in the restaurant's makeshift office. The dog now carried not just one, but two names, each representing a different part of his journey. It was a constant reminder that sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves again. The day of the restaurant's reopening dawned sunny, as if Seattle's sky itself wanted to celebrate the moment. The facade of the old steakhouse Supreme had given way to something completely new. Brave Gastronomy with Purpose gleamed in golden letters against a welcoming blue background. The transformation went far beyond the name. The space had been totally redesigned to include a pet-friendly outdoor area with water fountains and food bowls, available 24 hours a day for stray animals. Inside, a large screen constantly displayed stories of pets for adoption and emotional reunions made possible by the support network that formed from Brave's story. Henry circulated through the dining room, checking the final details before opening. His chef's uniform now sported a small brooch with the silhouette of a dog, a gift from Amanda, who had been promoted to coordinator of the restaurant's social project. Each employee wore a similar brooch, a symbol of the commitment to the animal cause that now defined the establishment. Greg, in turn, seemed like a completely different person. The impeccable suit was still there, but his countenance had softened. He walked around the corners of the restaurant, personally adjusting the bowls of fresh water for the animals, something that would have been unthinkable a few weeks before. "You know, Henry," he commented as they watched together the line already forming outside, "sometimes we need to lose everything to find something much bigger." The first customer to enter was, naturally, Mrs. Lucy. Her eyes watered as she saw the transformation of the space. On the main wall, a photo gallery told the story that had changed everything, from the moment of confrontation on the rainy night to the behind-the-scenes of the renovation. It was a narrative of redemption and hope. The menu also reflected the establishment's new philosophy. In addition to traditional dishes, there was now a section called Solidarity Flavors, where part of the value of each dish was allocated to animal protection projects. Henry had created special recipes, each named after an animal that had found a home through the restaurant's initiative. During the inauguration event, an exciting surprise. Aunt Bernadette, who had been located through social networks, made a virtual appearance via video call. Upon seeing Brave, her eyes filled with tears. She recounted how she had suffered when she needed to leave in a hurry, and how fate had provided a happy ending that she could never have imagined. "Baron was always special," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Now, as Brave, he has become a symbol of hope for so many other animals. He couldn't be in better hands." The success of the new establishment was instant. Social networks, which had previously been the stage for criticism, now overflowed with positive messages and inspiring stories. Brave became more than a restaurant. It was a meeting point for animal lovers, a mobilization center for social causes, and an example of how a crisis can turn into an opportunity. Dr. Maria established a volunteer veterinary office in the space adjacent to the restaurant, where she offered free care for stray animals. Amanda coordinated a professional training program for young people in vulnerable situations, teaching them about customer service and animal care. On a quiet night, after hours, Henry sat in the restaurant's new outdoor area, Brave lying at his feet. He observed the city lights and reflected on how a single decision can trigger a wave of transformations. His cell phone vibrated. It was another message from someone telling how Brave's story had inspired a change in their life. Sometimes, he thought, stroking his faithful companion's head, the true flavor of life lies not only in what we put on the plate, but in what we share with our heart. In his special corner of the restaurant, Brave rested peacefully, as if he knew that his journey had been just the beginning of something much bigger. His serene gaze no longer carried the marks of abandonment, but rather the certainty that he had found not just a home, but a mission. Dear listeners, we hope that Henry and Brave's story has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of transformation and hope, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Share your own moments of compassion and transformation in the comments. Together, we can make a difference.